In developing your ability to create efficient models, one of the most difficult things to get a good handle on is when you're creating too much geometry and when you're not creating enough. Those additional lines in your mesh do typically yield a smoother, more deformable surface. But that added geometry also comes with a downside, forcing your computer to work harder to get the job done. Too much or too little surface detail will also be a determining factor when considering just who or exactly where what you're creating will be used. Video game companies, for an example, demand that the objects imported into their game engines be kept to a minimum weight-wise, while objects created for, let's say, a feature film need the added mesh weight in order to appear more lifelike in scenes where the audience gets a close-up look. So, different applications, different requirements. To help you in being able to create models for all applications and scenarios that might come up, Max has gathered a handy set of modifiers that can be used to both increase and decrease the weight of your mesh geometry. Let's start by first looking at ways to reduce an object's weight. I'm going to be using a file named Add and Remove Geometry. You can find it over in the Working Files folder. Having edged faces active in our view, that being done with the F4 shortcut, reveals that this model certainly has its share of geometry. Let's check the actual weight of our surface. We'll select the object, right-click, then choose Object Properties. Up in the top left area, you'll notice both the vertex and face count. This object is currently weighing in at almost 34,000 faces. Let's close the dialog and render and see how this currently looks. So right now, things are looking very smooth. Let's see if we can't take our face number down some while still maintaining the integrity of the shape of our surface. We'll close the render, then head over to the command panel, getting into the modifier list. Now the one I'm going to be looking for is called Pro Optimizer. When you find it, go ahead and click on its name. Down in the Optimization Level category, click on Calculate. This will give Max a quick look at the geometry. Now we can go in for some changes. Below the Calculate button, you'll see the current statistics, listing for both before and after. Above that, you'll notice adjustments for both the vertex percentage and the actual vertex count. Now what I'm going to do is grab the vertex percent spinner, taking it lower. As you do, you'll see that Max is automatically cutting away the geometry that it feels it doesn't need. Now I've set mine to right around 50%. Look at the before and after figures. Where in which we started with over 34,000 faces, we're now down to under 17,000. Let's render again and see how the model is holding up. Well, so far so good. Let's see if we can't take that number even lower. This time I'll take the value just to about 25%. This is going to give me just under 8,500 faces. Let's render again. Now we're still not getting much of a breakdown. We'll continue to take the number down further and further until we start to see dramatic changes in our geometry. Okay, I've got this down now to about 10% of the original geometry. Let's render again. Now at this point, we are starting to see just a slight hint of the topology on the surface beginning to break down. But think about that, we've removed almost 30,000 of our original 34,000 faces. So that's the Pro Optimizer. Now when you need to go in the opposite direction, adding geometry in order to smoothen things out, Max gives you a couple of different modifier options. One called Turbo Smooth, the other Mesh Smooth. Let's take a look at both. Let's start by deleting the object on the screen, right-clicking, then in the top part of the menu choosing Unhide All. We can then hit Z to center our model. Now, nothing fancy here. I simply took a box and extruded and beveled a few polys. But in that, you'll notice we have a very coarse or blocky shape. Let's see if we can't change that. We'll select the model, heading over to the modifier list. Let's first choose the Turbo Smooth. Okay, right away we've seen a smoothening effect. In the controls, take note of the iterations value. Let's change that to 2. Now what this does is quadruple the amount of geometry, so you got to be careful not to take this number too high. Let's try 3. Now the Turbo Smooth also has an option that allows you to display a lightweight version of your model in the viewport while still rendering using a more detailed, higher iteration value. Directly below iterations, turn on Render Iterations. Okay, now we'll take the main iteration to 0, that's going to be the one for the viewport, and we'll take our render iterations to 3. This will maintain a low polygon count in our viewport as we work, yet still give us a high quality render. Let's now render up and see how that looks. Quite a bit of difference as the smoothing has taken effect. Let's also try the Mesh Smooth. We'll first need to delete the Turbo Smooth, so over in the stack, we'll go to that entry, right-click, and delete. Okay, back in the list and down to the M's, choosing Mesh Smooth. Unlike the Turbo Smooth, the Mesh Smooth offers a few different methods of being able to calculate your subdivisions. Let's change over to Classic. It just basically breaks down the geometry in a different way. Now in the subdivision amount section, iterations in particular, change that to 2. And there again we've got our smoothing effect. Let's try 3. Max has further divided our geometry in a precise way. Now, one of the advantages that Mesh Smooth has over Turbo Smooth is that it can be applied to the sub-object level. We'll first need to delete the Mesh Smooth in the stack. Now, back in my view, I'm going to orbit around so I'm more in kind of a top position. I'll now drop into polygon mode and select a few polys. I'm going to grab the tips on each side. Okay, back to more of an angled position, and we'll add the modifier. We'll drop back in the list, again choosing Mesh Smooth. Now at this point, it appears the Mesh Smooth has been applied to the entire object. The reason being is because of a setting down under the subdivision method category. You need to uncheck Apply to Whole Mesh. Now, down at the iterations, let's try 2. Why don't we also change the method of calculating our subdivisions from NURMS to Classic? Okay, let's orbit around and see how that looks. So the unselected polygons have maintained their sharper surfaces, while the selected polygons have now been smoothened. Let's change the iterations from 2 up to 3. Now take a look at that, nice and smooth in the areas that we had selected. So that'll give you a few options when wanting to either add or remove geometry from an object. Finding ways to put these modifiers to use won't be hard. So remember how they work and pull them out when the situation calls for it. I'm going to go ahead and save the file out as Add and Remove Geometry Completed if you'd like to look it over.